So tonight, our topic is called the Colourful Womb. So the womb, as many of us know, is more than just a physical environment where babies are carried or where the first menstrual cycle is released during the monthly shedding of cells and tissues. Our womb is a sacred place where we first experience relatedness to our mother and to our heritage. And I think many of us would agree that it's a very sacred place where we receive the first messages of our culture. It's a place of potentiality, a portal for creativity and passion. And the endometrium itself, the womb's lining, is of course full of cellular memory and ancestral knowledge. We marinate here and emerge with imprints that shape us culturally, socially, and psychologically. So tonight, it's a great honor and a great pleasure to have Shatia Owsley with us, who is a holistic, psychosocial, and trauma practitioner who's going to share her story, her family stories, cultural traditions around birth, and particularly about her healing work with families. And we just heard earlier on, she has a real passion to talk about teen moms and young moms and the whole Black maternal health birth community. And she is highly accomplished and has done numerous courses that I could actually fill the whole evening beginning to describe here. But she's worked in maternal health and social services for over 18 years. And her professional journey has brought her in touch with teen moms, with infants and children with complex medical conditions, as well as women and families at varying life stages. And she's earned all kinds of degrees, including a master's in health education and promotion. And her studies have often been focused on education, and particular a group called the BIPOC community. That's the kind of a common word in America, but it's something that we're going to ask you to explain a little bit more about. And her focus has been very much on the benefits of a healthy mind, body, and spirit connection during pregnancy. And we came to know Shatia through her work with APA in the field of pre and perinatal psychology, and particularly were sort of woken up in a way by your presentation approach within the Black Heartbeat series. And perhaps we could kick off to hear a little bit about that, about how that came about, because I know you were a pre and perinatal graduate with APA,
Yeah.
and then somehow that gave birth to the series. Tell us
Yes.
more. Yeah.
Yes. I'm so happy to be here. Hello, everyone. So the Black Heartbeat series started after I had completed my certification with APA. And so when I started with APA, I was one of very few people of color who went through the program. And so they asked me, as a woman of color, would you mind vlogging your experience and how the material impacted you as you go through the modules and the information through the program? So I said, sure, no problem. And from that, I was able to really talk about my experience, what I felt, what came up for me, some of the thoughts and feelings I experienced reading the material and how it resonated with me. Through the years, I continued a relationship with APA, and they said, hey, we're still not really reaching the BIPOC community. And so what is it that we need to do? How can we share this information with your community? Because we feel that it would be a great benefit. And I said, well, one of the things is you have to package it in a way that our community will be able to receive it. And it's very text heavy. It's very material heavy. It's a lot of information to digest. And so I said, well, how about just highlighting some of the work that Black practitioners or Indigenous practitioners are doing within the community. And, you know, they have their Monday lives where they have speakers that come and they talk about everything within the maternal health community, but many of those speakers were not people of color. And so they asked about doing one specifically for people of color and shining lights on the amazing work that Black birth workers were doing. And that's how the Black Heartbeat series was born. And so this year will be year 4 going into the Black Heartbeat series. And I host it every year. I go and I look for amazing practitioners in the field of maternal health, holistic health, who are working with families, specifically in the BIPOC community. And we shine a light on the amazing work that they're doing. And so it also helps APA to create relationships with practitioners of color who are doing amazing work, and how they can partner, possibly how they can build relationships, how they can collaborate with each other. And also shares information with the APA community on what is happening and what work is being done within the BIPOC community.
No, it's such valuable work. But even the word BIPOC, I know, like, my daughter's, an academic at university, and she's very familiar with that term, but it's not a household word for lots of people here in Europe. I just wondered whether you could say something more about that, how that came about, that term, and who you feel that includes.
So Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So your Native Americans, you have your Black, Asian, anyone who is a melanated person, anyone who is, taken, on Indigenous land, anyone with traditional cultural practices related more so to people from Africa to Asia, just all over. But it's really more so talking about even the minorities, the marginalized, the people who are impacted the most with discrimination and racism, and have gone through a lot of trauma in a way. And so instead of just saying Black people, or it encompasses all people of color.
Yeah,
so
no, it's a very broad term. It's great. Yeah, it's very inclusive. Yeah. So I mean, could you actually paint us a picture of the kind of work that you do? It would be lovely to hear, like, a typical day, or just to get a feeling for what you do.
Well, first, I'm a mom. So I'm a mom of a 1-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a bonus son who's 18 in his first year in college. So my days are busy, just to say the least. But the work that I do with families varies from prenatal planning. I do a lot of prenatal planning and postpartum planning with families. And what that looks like is starting with, so now you're pregnant, what is the plan? What does that look like? And so I function off of the 7 dimensions of health, where everything is interconnected. We're not just focusing on the physical, just the physicality of pregnancy, right? Of the body. We're talking about your spiritual health, your mental health, your emotional health. How does this affect your job? How does this affect your finances? How does this affect your social life, your relationships? And I think that coming with this approach and how I work with families in this way, it helps them to fully understand and integrate everything that's happening. Because I think a lot of times we get so excited about the birth, especially families who have been waiting to get pregnant for a very long time, that sometimes there are certain things that are not at the top of the list. And then when they come, it can be a surprise. So my goal is to help families from the beginning talk about everything in all the different categories of your life to plan as best as you can. With that, I also include energy healing and other sacred modalities in the healing process through pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. So I work a lot with families as far as the whole planning and putting together a team for them. So it's not just me. I'm only one person, and so I can't do everything. So I believe in a collaborative and integrative approach to health, and talking about all of the different services that we can put together so they have a holistic team, so that their healing and the journey from pregnancy all the way to postpartum and even beyond, what does that look like for you?
Mm.
And these are the services, these are your available options. And I coax them and work with them all the way through.
Oh,
So,
fantastic.
yeah.
But I imagine from your experiences, which, 18 years ago might have been a little bit different,
Mhm.
we've spoken a little bit about this idea of being a bridge. And I'm wondering, in some of the statistics that we look at in Europe and the UK, the term is used, oh, well, there's low uptake from
Mhm.
BIPOC women, there's low
Mhm.
uptake, and that's why maybe there's difficulties, maternal difficulties and so on. But I'm wondering if you end up, building a kind of a bridging role to make it comfortable for people to uptake services and to find support within the medical system. Is that something that you end up doing?
I do. I do. And community support is extremely important. Having a circle of support for families is extremely important. And so bridging the gap, not just within the family, but also outside of the family, as you mentioned, is extremely important. And so
Yeah.
being an advocate, how do you navigate a system that may not always have your best interests at heart? Right? How are you moving through a system that may not cater to someone who looks like you? Who do you talk to? Where do you turn? What are the community resources available to you? And how does a family advocate for themselves and so that they can get the best services possible? And so it is a lot. It is a lot to do that, but the important thing is empowering families, advocating for them, and helping them to advocate for themselves. And so that is working with medical professionals as well as holistic health professionals to bridge the gap to say this is holistic health care. We're
Yeah.
treating the whole body, the whole entire family, right? And so everyone has a role in ensuring that not only the baby thrives and does well, but the birthing person, the partner, and the family as a whole, they are able to grow
Yeah.
together. And so that's extremely important.
Yeah. I'm wondering, is there a particular story you could tell us? You don't have to name names, but we'd love to hear maybe some good news stories as well.
Good news stories. Good news stories. Okay. So I did have a family who didn't have a lot of information the first time they were pregnant. I didn't work with them the first time they were pregnant. I didn't know them at the time. So they didn't know what a doula was. They didn't really know what was happening. They knew they were pregnant. They knew where they were going to have a baby. And they just kind of went along with what was told to them from their medical professional. And the birth ended up in a C-section. And so, as I mentioned, I wasn't there, so I don't know all of the ins and outs. But when the mom came to me, who was referred to me by another client that I had, her goal or what she wanted for her second birth was to have a VBAC. So a vaginal birth after cesarean. And it was very important to her. So one of the things when working with families is I want them to be able to express what their wishes are, but also to be realistic and to be flexible in what birth can be unpredictable, right? And so we want to be able to navigate according to what we are able to control, and the things that we aren't able to control, how can we move through them with gentleness? And so
Yes.
we did everything that we could to prepare, and that was the emotional support, that was the physical aspect of everything, from the food she was eating to exercising to getting her a therapist, and also working with other holistic health providers, a herbalist, a chiropractor. So we had a full support team really helping her and really working with her. And at the end, she labored at home for as long as she could. And by the time she went to the hospital, she was pretty far along. She was in
Mhm.
active labor, and she had a successful VBAC because she did the
Wow.
work and she had the support. And she was very excited about that. And I will say her medical practitioner was excited too and happy as well, that she believed in it. And she said, if I have to have another C-section, okay, but I want to do everything I can to try to see if I can get the outcome I wanted. And it was the most amazing thing to hear her call to say, I had my V back, I got
Yeah,
my V back. And so
so
just telling
exciting.
her and being excited for her, well, you did the work. And
Yeah.
it was absolutely, amazing for her. So
Exactly. And I guess it's the gift when the baby is able to sort of drop into the right position, because there are
yes.
times when all of that is done. And I'm sure there's listeners here where that sometimes doesn't come true. So
Right.
that's a
Where that
reality as well.
flexibility and gentleness
Yes.
comes in, right?
Yeah. And regardless of
Absolutely.
the connection with the baby, sometimes that just doesn't roll through. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What would be great is actually to hear about your specific experience with the BIPOC community. And, we've done a little bit of looking at the statistics over here in Europe as well, but we'd love to hear about, the stories in the States about, obviously, there's issues around maternal mortality,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure there's a lot of quite charged topics, but I wonder whether we could gently kind of pour out some of the topics and just explore them a little bit and hear your experience.
Yes. So, just with the families that I work with, many of them are Black women, and who have either have previous children prior to working with me, or this is their first time having a baby. But many of them are scared going into birth because of the statistics, because of the things that they hear in the news, because how they are affected by family. One of my clients, when she found out that she was pregnant, she had just lost a very good friend in childbirth. And so the first 5 months of her pregnancy was really working on supporting her emotionally, because that's how terrified she was to give birth, because she said, I don't know. I'm a Black woman. Are they going to listen to me? Do they believe that my pain is real? When I tell them that I'm not doing well, or I have this ailment, or I need additional help, are they going to believe me? And so these are some of the things that many Black women are experiencing when they go into the healthcare system. They're being challenged, they're not being believed about what's going on with their bodies. And women know their body best. They know what's happening within themselves. And so that is a big challenge. And so some of those things, where does it stem from? So I have a couple of notes here. Just the social factors. So racial trauma, discrimination, marginalization, systemic barriers are some implicit biases within the healthcare system. And then you also have to think about, where are these hospitals located as well? That also plays into it. If you don't have hospitals close by, how can you get the prenatal care that you need? Okay. If you're a Black woman, or, and you're living in an area that cannot even support your basic needs. So how are you eating? What is transportation like for you? Do you have other children that you have to take care of? It's very difficult. It's very hard, when you have other things and you're trying to get your basic needs met, as well as trying to take care of yourself and your body. And so when you go into a hospital setting, or you go into, a medical setting, and you're explaining, hey, this is what's happening, and you're not really being listened to, or things are not being explained to you in a way that you can fully understand them to make an informed decision, that also can be a barrier to the best health care
Mm,
for that mom. And so that's just kind of like scratching the surface of some
yes.
of the things that are happening, of why the numbers are so high, and why it's impacting especially Black moms the way that it is.
And I mean, could we tease that out a little bit? Like when you say systemic barriers, like are we dealing with people who have no awareness of the different needs, the different cultural needs, language? Are we talking about language barriers?
We
Are
are
we,
talking about language barriers, cultural barriers, um, just racism.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if we're thinking about just going back in history of how certain things from slavery, the medical experimentations, and how people look at Black people and look at the Black body. There were things back then where they believed that Black people didn't feel pain the same as white people felt pain.
Mm.
So that is still within our system to this day. So if a Black woman comes in and says, hey, my pain is at an 8, then you may just get Tylenol. Whereas a white woman may go and say, my pain is at an 8, and she may be able to get an epidural at that
Yes.
time, right? And
Yes.
so those are things that are really embedded in the medical system. And so even if people don't truly know why they feel that way, they don't know where the root cause of it comes from, it's still impacting our community
Yes.
in that way.
Yes. And statistically, that's what is very clearly shown as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, without needing to sort of fly numbers around, what are the core topics that you see in the stats time and time again? What are the core issues that seem to raise up?
Oh, just some of the ones that I mentioned, the racial trauma, the discrimination, all of those have an impact, right? And why the numbers are as high as they are. And so when you're in a system and you're trying to navigate as a person of color in a system that questions you, questions your abilities, questions if you're telling the truth, questions you as a person, as a human being, it is very difficult to navigate in a space like that and put your trust in the hands of someone that you hope, will take care of you and take care of your baby.
Exactly. I mean, it's an option here, but, do you feel able to say anything about your experiences as a mom of 3 boys? So would that be okay to ask that?
Yeah. So I am fortunate. I will say that I have been extremely fortunate to find practitioners who were very kind, very caring, who listened, who took the time to answer my questions and to really work with me on alternatives when there was something that I didn't necessarily agree with or something that I didn't feel comfortable with. They spoke to me with respect and respected my wishes. And I know that's not true for everyone.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that when I found out that I was pregnant with my 10-year-old, the anxiety that rose in me that I had from the time that I found out that I was going to have a baby boy, because at that time in the world, there was so much going on in the media and on the news. There were so many young Black men being killed by the police. And so it just made me have extreme anxiety of how am I going to protect my baby? How am I going to protect my son, once he gets older? And you want to keep them in this bubble. You want to keep them safe because you know that when they step outside of the door, even though they are your precious baby son, 16, 17 years old, everyone doesn't look at them that way. And it's just because of the color of their skin that they can be seen as a threat. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, how do I tell when it's time for him to drive? If you get pulled over by the police, how do you, what do you need to do so that you can make it home? Right. Those are the things that we think about especially when you have a Black sons.
It keeps you awake at night.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're constantly texting. Are you okay? Are you good? What time are you coming home? Where are you? It can be a stressful situation.
And that would be widespread here in Europe, in Ireland, in the UK as well. I suppose, I'm not sure of the actual legal term, but the sus laws or whatever it is, we're not too far away from that kind of, finger pointing and stuff like that. So it must be a harrowing situation,
Absolutely.
And where do you feel you're at, like after all these educational pieces that you've acquired along your way. Do you feel that's the answer? Do you feel you've been able to infiltrate and maybe, help people to appreciate the different needs and have a greater awareness? Do you feel you've made some impact in that way? And I'm sure as one person alone, that's a hard question, banging on the door.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what do you feel the pathways could be to open the hearts, open the minds a little bit more?
I think conversations like this, I think just people being open, we have a lot more in common than we don't, just as human beings, because everyone has a story. Everyone has experienced some type of uncomfortable experience. It may not be the same as someone who has a Black body. However, there are certain conversations that can be had if we're open, right? And open to learning, open to listening, open to just asking questions, not to debate or not to be argumentative, but to learn, right?
Yes.
And to tap into ourselves, tap in as people of color to ourselves, for us in order to help us heal ourselves, but also for people, for everyone else who's interested in wanting to know a little bit more. Can we step into your world? What does that look like? We can never walk in your shoes, right? But we are open to hearing and then asking, how can we support? How can we be an ally? How can we learn and be careful with the learning in the sense of not being offended, right? And so our stories are different, but it doesn't mean that it has to be brutal. It has to be hurtful or, and so uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be so uncomfortable where people have to shy away. Sometimes when we go through a challenge or we're in an uncomfortable situation, I feel like it's just Spirit's way of really opening ourselves up and forcing us to ask ourselves the question, why does this make you uncomfortable?
Yes.
What is it about the question or the situation that's making you uncomfortable? And so that is forcing us then to look within inside of ourselves, to write down why do I feel this way?
Yes.
And once you ask yourself that, ask yourself the next question. So why does that make me feel that way? And once you continue to keep tapping in, then you can maybe get to the root of why this has happened. Maybe my family was like this. This is all I know. This is all I've seen before. And then once you have that answer, what do you do with it? What do you want to do with it? Do you want to learn more? Do you want to get to know more? And being open to learning more.
Yeah, I'd just like to put a message out with the group here. I think, we'd be really open to this becoming a conversation. So if there's people there who have experiences or they'd like to put something in the chat, or even if they'd like to come on and ask a question, we'd really be open to that because, the core purpose perhaps of this initial chat with Shatia is to kind of feel how can OBJ become in a more inclusive platform and really engage with the topics that matter. And as you say, whether you're a person of color or whether you're another kind of woman that's just gone in and had a disempowering experience, it's how to be with that, how to be with the weaknesses of the system and be a human being in the face of that without being aggressive or difficult. It's just like opening people's eyes to the service and the way that each one of us would like to be treated and managed, isn't it? That's the thing, I mean, would you have any specific guidance for our birth journey? Have you got any reflections about that? How we could engage a wider audience and be as inclusive as we wish to be?
Like I said, I think this is a start. I think asking a question, having these forums, I think that being open to hearing from other cultures and other perspectives, because learning someone else's story, seeing how they walk in the same world, but the experience is completely different, that in itself can be an eye-opening experience, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so I think these are the conversations. So having speakers come on who are people of color to share different things, I think that's how you bridge the gap. That's how you create relationships. That's how
Yeah.
you create community. But most importantly, that is how you learn, right? And
Mm.
it means that you have to be open. You really have to have an open mind. And when you start to notice that there are certain things that are coming up, like I said, that make you feel uncomfortable or you get offended by certain things that are said, remember to just kind of take a step back and say, hey, what's causing this?
Yeah.
What's making me feel this way?
Yes.
And asking those questions, and then you can dive deeper. You can have a conversation, say, hey, you said this thing and this came up for me, and I would like to just ask you a question about your experience. It's not my
Totally.
experience, right? But it is your experience, and I want to know a little bit more about it, not to fix it, not to save the person, not to
Mm.
change their experience, right? Just to listen to their
Yes.
experience. And then be able to say, is there something that I can do? Right. And if the
Yes.
person says no, you just being open to listening is good enough, then
Yeah.
be okay with that being good enough. Because that in itself, you both, a person felt heard and you were able to listen and
Mm.
learn something, right? And then you're bridging gaps, right? You're building relationships, you're having conversation. And if nothing else, it sparks something else in
Yes.
a person to be able to like, oh, maybe I'll dig a little deeper into that, or I'll think a
Mm.
little more about that. Um, or I didn't know that what I said was offensive, you
For sure.
know?
For sure.
So
Yeah.
it's all learning. We're all
It
learning.
is. It
We're
is.
all learning.
And I mean, very specifically, I'm just thinking, and there's a few questions coming through that we can refer to in a minute, but I'm just thinking I have worked with a few people of color and their experience of their birth. And,
Mm-hmm.
very practically, there was a few people in Ireland, maternal deaths and so on. And I was just wondering, was it something even within the nursing profession that there could be more education around skin tone and understanding? A person may be particularly resilient, and this young woman was very sort of strong, and she did an amazing labor. And they said, look, you can walk back, there's no problem with you. And then 2 seconds later she totally collapsed, and they
Mm-hmm.
obviously couldn't perceive her bodily state, her
Mm-hmm.
shock, because they're
Mm-hmm.
used to seeing other signs of shock. And
Right.
I wondered if there's enough education around that, or, as you say, levels of blood loss, or whatever the issues
Mm-hmm.
are, whether that's all included within midwifery and medical trainings.
I don't think enough. I don't think it's included enough to talk about the cultural aspect, because we're not only just talking about skin tone, right? We're also
Mm.
talking about different backgrounds and religions as well,
Yes.
right? And so there are a lot of different cultural expectations within, a certain culture, right? So you have different traditions and different things that are happening in different parts of the world, in different families. Just like there in the UK, you have different traditions, and in those traditions you have different pockets of people who have their traditions within traditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And different ancestral um, just different ancestral needs that come up, right? So with this in birth, when you're in the medical profession, it is extremely important to be culturally competent, right? So there's those
I like that
trainings.
phrase. I like cultural competence. That's your next book, isn't it? That sounds amazing. I like it.
Not a phrase I coined, but what
It's a
I
good one.
learned about actually doing a paper about Muslims in the healthcare and
Okay.
how they were treated in the
Mm.
healthcare system. And so those things need to be addressed, right? And so it's not going to look the same. Someone who has brown skin and someone who is extremely fair or who has white skin,
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to tell the difference. So you're going to have to listen. You're going to
Hmm.
have to pay attention. You're going to have to give the same type of energy and support that you would give to someone who is to a non-melanated person,
Yes.
to a melanated person. You're not going to just be able to look at a person and say, "Oh, you look good. Go ahead and
Yeah.
go, because you're not as flush or you're not turning red.
Yeah.
That it's all about the training, but
And
it's
is the
not just the
space,
physical training, right?
I was wondering, is the space even within the birth plan for people to elaborate about their cultural wishes or,
But people have to be receptive to the birth plan.
yeah.
So that's the other
Yeah.
thing. So in the States here, not everyone is receptive to a birth plan. When you go in with a birth plan to your medical professional, to your OB, and say, hey, this is my birth plan, you cross your fingers and you hope that they
Mm.
will look at it and pay attention to it. But you will have people who will make a mental note to, label you as a difficult patient if you have too many restrictions, too many things on that birth plan. And so you go in with good intentions. However, this is why it's extremely important to have a birth companion, to have an advocate, to be educated yourself, on what your rights are in the hospital, what you can, what the medical staff can and cannot do. And so those things are extremely, so you're trying to merge those two things together, and it can be difficult, and it is difficult
Yes.
in some cases.
Yeah, and you work in that profession, don't you? You go into
Yes.
hospital with parents, with families, which must be such an incredible support for them.
Yes.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Look, we have a question here from Katrina. Katrina, you're very welcome to show your face if you want to come and say hi if you'd like to speak. Otherwise, I can read it out for you. Just unmute if you'd like to connect and say hi.
Hello, both of you.
Hello.
It's lovely to hear Shatia again. I heard you speaking on APA, and I just so enjoyed what you had to say before. What I get from you when I listen to you is somebody that just calms my vagus nerve. You've got an easy listening kind of way about you, which just makes me feel I could like surrender to whatever you ask me to.
I love it.
Thank you.
Thank
I kind of feel that all mothers have that worry about their sons going out in the world, don't they? My niece is living in Cork in Ireland, and her boys are very cocooned, and she worries about them going out because they don't know how to deal with the world out there, because everybody has their culture in their own home, don't they? So I was just thinking about people's uniqueness. Doesn't matter. Everybody comes from a different culture.
Absolutely.
And I'm doing a lot of work with Carlton Terry at the moment. I don't know if you know his work.
No.
It's the birth mask reveal, and how whatever happens to us during our birth stays with us for the rest of our life. It's written on our faces. So it's just such an important time to help people through. And that's what you're doing without kind of like knowing about his work.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Have a look at his work. It's amazing.
I definitely will. Absolutely. Thank you.
And and you're obviously a good listener, and that's what we need to be, isn't it, with the mums?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Sara is with her interviewing. So that's my two penny worth.
Thank you so much, Katrina. You're great.
Thank you.
I mean, and it's always interesting if there's people on the call that work in the healthcare field. We'd love to hear your experience in your countries, and or even come back to us at a later stage, because all of this is valuable as everyone's kind of opening their eyes to the important topics that
I just might add that my step granddaughter is a person of colour, and she had a really difficult experience in a hospital in Luton, and I think that she wasn't heard. So my difficulty as somebody that knows about this is that she wouldn't listen to me. She only wanted to look at Google. Or what her friends told her. So it's like missing out on the traditions, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of a disconnect now about what's happening with information that's available online. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't know if you find that.
Well, I think that, the internet is a blessing and a curse,
Mm.
at the same time, it provides us with a lot of great information, but it also provides us with a lot of misinformation. And so many times we run to Google or, WebMD, to diagnose ourselves or to try to figure out what's happening and what's going on. And like I said, there can be some amazing information on there. But I think this is where support and community happen, and why that's important. Also, I don't know how old your granddaughter is, but just my experience with working with teen moms, there is a different approach to how you work with teen moms. It's not the same way that you approach a mom who may be in her 30s or 40s or even late 20s. You have to approach them completely and totally differently. And there is a level of patience that you have with them. You have to give them grace because these are still babies having babies.
This was an older mum.
Oh, okay. Well,
so she knew it. She knew it all.
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes you have that too. And the biggest thing is just being able to be a support, right? And so just being able to hold space for people and be there when they do need a listening hand, or if they do come back and say, "Hey, maybe I wasn't so right about this. I'm willing to listen." And in that time, just not, just being able to say, "Absolutely, I'm here. No judgment. This is your baby, your body, your birth, your experience, but I am here and I am your circle of support. And so what is it that I can do to hold space for you? How can I assist you or help you?" And so I think that's the best thing is just being there and listening.
Yeah, really vital. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, would you like to tell us any more particular stories about, I mean, particularly, I don't know, around the teen mom thing, or, I mean, another passion of yours that I forgot to mention was that you really wanted to be a NICU nurse, didn't you? The
I did. From the time I was little, I believe Spirit put me here to work with babies and families. I can't remember a time not working, or loving or having someone's baby. Before I had my own, I was always babysitting. I always wanted to, hold a baby or be with a baby all the time. And so I thought I was going to be a NICU nurse. That is what I thought from the time I think was in middle school all the way up until I entered college, is I want to work with the little babies and be a NICU nurse. Once I got to college, I took a psychology class, and my path shifted. I got an undergrad in social work, and I started working with babies and families more on a psychosocial level than being just in the medical profession, just being in the hospital. And so that in itself allowed me more room to be more integrative and to
more infiltrations.
Yes. And I found that I love talking about the emotions and the psychology and the heart of things. I think sometimes things can be, when it's science, sometimes it can be so sterile. It can just be so, even though there's some complexities there in science, we don't know all and we're learning. I just love the heart of being able to listen and to be able to support, and for people to be able to share what is going on inside. You don't have a formula for that, right? There's no math for that. It is just being present. And that is where, it shifted it for me. And that's what I bring into the work that I do.
If I might say, it's just your expansiveness, your expansive heart that I know that Andrea's been saying, "Ooh, look at this woman's energy," you know what I mean? And to contain you within a small little, operating theater or something like that, I just feel, you're taking your place in that wider field, and all the different waves of the impact of your work and the people that you work with is absolutely extraordinary. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a little time. If you want to tell us another story, we'd love to hear. We'd love to hear your experience and direct stories like that, if you have one that comes to you. Oh, actually,
that's a question.
I see a little hand coming up. You could give you a little bit more time to think about that. Yeah, Pauline, just go ahead with your question. You're welcome.
Well, it's really a comment on what you've been talking about, because I used to be a midwife back in the 80s, and I did witness racism, and I didn't have the kind of language at the time, but I certainly felt uncomfortable with what I was witnessing, and I know that, having had that experience, I know things have changed since the 80s. I mean, I'm talking about Britain. That's where I was working as a midwife. But I feel that it's really difficult for Black women or BIPOC women to come into a kind of a very, very fixed, very controlling environment that the medical profession, how it operates. It's very rigid. And I can really I really can appreciate how vulnerable BIPOC women feel when they're coming in, when they're in pain and they're going to go into labor. They're so vulnerable, and not being heard, not being seen is so damaging. It can undermine, can be so frightening, I think. Yeah. You can really appreciate how frightening it is, because it can just take one comment and that trust is lost.
Yes.
So I really understand. And I think the work that you're doing by collecting people around the parents, I think that's the way forward. So when they're going into that kind of hospital environment, they're going in with a support system around them. And I think that's so crucial. So they're not feeling so vulnerable and so alone. I think that's what I was witnessing. I mean, my experience was working and working with mothers who came from India at the time, as well as the women from Afro-Caribbean communities. And some of those, especially for the Asian mothers, there was no interpreters around. They hadn't even bothered to actually bring interpreters. So the communication was practically not there. It was, or maybe their own child had come in to be the interpreter. So it's completely, putting all that responsibility on the child was not fair. I can feel sort of myself getting kind of emotional. I'm still sort of can carry, the witnessing of that time is still sort of with me, and it's been really good to be able to put it into a kind of perspective and see it as racism that was in operation there. So I just wanted to actually share that with you.
Thank you.
It's beautiful to hear you speak, Pauline, and it's beautiful to know that you were there, and I don't want to be facile about it, but you're a person that's very engaged with this work, and phenomenal that you were present there. Yeah.
And I wish I could have done more. I think that's where the pain for me is that I didn't do more than what I didn't speak up enough. I think that's what I was with at the time.
Yeah. How is that for you, Shatia, to hear that?
I appreciate it. I do. We need more people who are willing to just acknowledge, right? Acknowledge what's happening and what's going on. That's the first step. We can't ignore it or act like it doesn't exist, because it does exist. The numbers show that it exists. The deaths show that it exists. Mom's stories during birth and after birth, during the postpartum time, that's when they have to sit with those feelings and emotions, and they are stored in the body, because where are they going to go? Where do they turn to? Where is the support? And so are they able to truly fully show up for themselves and their babies and their families? Because it can have a huge impact when you're not heard. I mean, we don't even have to talk about birth. We can just talk about regular everyday conversations when you're talking to someone and you want to share your point of view and they're talking over you, or they're distracted, or they're not listening. How does it make you feel? So just imagine a woman being in birth in her most vulnerable state, trying to express to the medical staff, this is what is happening with me, and no one is listening. How does that make that mom feel? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very frightening.
Yep.
And feeling very angry and frightened.
Yeah.
And quite rightly too.
And
Absolutely.
just curious, Pauline, what you witnessed there in the UK, would the woman often have a birth partner with her? Would she have had an advocate, a male partner, apart from the child interpreter? Who else would have she come in with?
At that time, there wasn't much encouragement to bring the partner in to be with the mother. So she was often very isolated at that time. It was a really horrendous time, the 80s, for midwifery, and the Radical Midwives Association came out of that time because it was so dominated by the medical profession, and they were imposing so much onto women and not really understanding the birth process. They just wanted to control it. It came from a place of control. So a lot of damage was being done that way. And so it has changed since that time. But that's why the Radical Midwives Association came out of that, to try and bring more of an understanding of the actual birth process and how to work with it rather than try to control it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it'd be great to be updated from the inside out, wouldn't it, Shatia? Just to hear within the different organizations, like, how did they get to where they are today, which is hopefully quite a few steps along, but of course, many, many more steps to go. Yeah.
Right. And I was just thinking, just the isolation, I think we saw a lot of that again during COVID. And so we have a lot of moms who are still, healing from the time in COVID. That were first-time moms, or even not even first-time moms, but especially first-time moms who their partners couldn't go to any doctor's appointments with them.
Yes.
They, many of them, maybe their partner was present, but they had to make sure that they had a negative COVID test first. And if they didn't, moms were by themselves, and so we kind of saw that again, that isolation in moms and partners and birthing people. They're still healing from that isolation back from 2020.
As are the babies.
Yes, as are all of the babies.
It's an extraordinary thing. I'm sure it's the same, where you're living as well. But I've often spoken to primary school teachers or, early care. And it's just that the capacity to speak, the capacity to be seen. And, there's a whole big navigation piece that they didn't have a chance to be even celebrated, perhaps, by family. Some of these COVID babies. And,
or everyone had on masks. So they're only used to seeing eyes, that was, another thing as well. So
yeah, I mean, just as we kind of come to a close, it's a question I'd love to ask you, and you may not have all the answers right now, and perhaps there'll be other times, but do you feel this, and I don't want to sort of group people obviously in one big generic kind of a group, but I just feel this incredible gifts from people who have still got some sense of their cultural heritage, or maybe they've got traditions, or values that might just be a little bit more wholesome and human and community-based maybe. And, is there something around that could be really gifted to the current birth practice? Maybe.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It brings me to the postpartum time. That's the first thing that pops in my mind is just the lying in period, right? The 42 days, the 30 days. That is cultural and, across multiple, several cultures where moms and grandmas and aunties, they come in and they take care of you. Right. And you can't do anything. You're not supposed to do anything. You're supposed to rest and bond, and they make you warm soup and they make sure that you're taken care of and they nurse you and they protect you. And so,
where can we get hold of one of these grandmas? Right. Can we dial a grandma?
Exactly. Great, and so, what I, that's what comes to mind. But most importantly, that is one of the things that I feel is needed is really when we do these intake forms or when we're talking to our clients or working with patients, I think that is something to ask. What are your ancestral traditions? What is your cultural background? Are there certain things that would make you feel more comfortable, to make you feel more at home, to make you feel heard, to make you feel like you have a piece of something from your culture here that would help during this process. It also gives you a bit of insight into people's thought process of why they do the things that they do, if you're able to understand their background and their culture. And so that's really wanting to know the person and not looking at the person as a number, right? Or just another patient. It's really wanting to get to know the person at its core. And so asking a few questions, that in itself allows someone to be heard. It allows someone to be seen. And it can make all the difference in the world, just having that information, because it would help, the staff to have better care, right? To ensure that that person has the best care if they know, hey, I have to have my head covered, or I have this type of trauma. And so touching me in this particular type of way makes me feel a certain type of way. I would like to have this type of aroma in the room because it reminds me of home and it calms me. It calms my spirit. And if I can be calm, then we can work together, right? And I can show up and be present, And so asking those questions, it doesn't take much. It does not take a lot just to get to know a person that is going to be in their most vulnerable state. For someone to just say, hey, I just want to, where are you from? Are there any cultural traditions, that you would like to bring in, or certain things that we shouldn't do or can't do, and I understand there are certain guidelines and certain things, but allow the person to be seen and heard.
Totally. And at least open up the conversation, even if it isn't possible to have exactly the right traditional food or exactly the right thing. Like what, I'd love to hear and understand what food would that grandmother bring in if she could, you just want to know, don't you? It's fascinating.
And I think that's the beauty of midwifery. I think that is the beautiful, the beauty of midwifery is that you learn so much, you can see so much, in some ways, especially outside of the hospital, home births, you're walking around, you have your music, there's so many different things that make the environment a lot more comfortable, and just being able to be, for everyone to be present and tapping into who the person is at their core. But the medical staff can do that as well, even if it's just talking to the person as a person and not as a patient.
Totally. Yeah. And I think as we round up now, Shatia, I think we're all in this, if I might just sort of say personally, this very PC world, politically correct world where sometimes, I know with my young young people that come in the house, you're worried about they or thee or, saying the wrong words.
Yes.
And, if we can all throw that out the window and just say, look, I might trip up, I might make a mistake. But anyway, my attitude is to make that connection and to build that connection and safety. And professionally, I guess that's what we're all about. And so what if we get the words wrong? It goes both ways, doesn't it? And we're just trying to, create that balance and deepen the connection and create more safety for everybody.
Yeah. A mutual respect, right?
Yes.
A mutual respect, being gentle, being open, being able to listen and show up and be present, knowing that there may not always be answers, but we want to make sure that we're acknowledging, we're seeing people, we're respecting them for whatever their path is. We're not all walking the same path, but that's okay.
Totally. So we're going to put if I can, I'm going to put a little link to your website here in the chat if anyone would like to look at that for later on, because it's been a wonderful conversation and really great to have you here on our birth journey, Shatia. So I'm just going to see whether I can put that in the chat. Yeah, that's your website there. There's probably all kinds of links. I'm sure, you could be followed on social media and all of that.
I am. Yes. And you can always just reach out to me on the information page on my website. I am in the process of revamping the website. So the information page right now is the best way to get in contact with me. And it will be up and running brand new very soon. We're just changing some things, adding some different services. So that we can make sure that we are providing the best care. So I would love to be in touch. And just fill out the information link there and I will get in contact with you and we can collaborate. So
fantastic. And you have that wisdom bubbling up from inside and infiltrating. I have this image of you infiltrating so many different systematic barriers. So I think that's great. Fantastic.
Awesome.
Well, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.